All right, this video is a super quick review of just a couple of the key principles of the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution is the replacement for the Articles of Confederation, so it goes into effect after the Constitutional Convention, and obviously it's been in effect ever since. So the key things to know about the Constitution is that it's really the opposite of the Articles of Confederation system. The Articles tried to put power all in the hands of like the individual states, and that didn't work because of how disorganized things were. So the Constitution establishes a national government that has sovereignty. It's really like a strong national government that has lots of powers that's going to sort of like force the 13 states to sort of cooperate. Um, One of the key principles that this new government is based upon is federalism. This is the idea that power is shared between the national government and the states. And obviously, this has changed a lot over the course of American history. The national government, through things like the Necessary and Proper Clause and by the use of grants, has continued to become more powerful at the expense of the state governments. It's also important to remember that the Articles of Confederation only had one branch, but the Constitution creates three. Obviously, there's an executive branch and a judicial branch that are new, and it also has a legislative branch like the Articles of Confederation did. Remember that one of the things that this new government stressed and the Constitution stressed was the idea of checks and balances and separation of powers between the branches. And each of the branches would be doing something different in terms of governing. And then there were checks and balances that each could have against the other to prevent another branch from abusing its power. So we talked about the fact that the only branch that's common between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution is the legislative branch. There's some differences. Remember, under the Articles of Confederation system, Congress was unicameral. There's only one house, whereas in the Constitution system, the legislative branch is bicameral. There's a House and a Senate. We spent a lot of time talking about those differences. Remember, because of the Great Compromise, back at the Constitutional Convention, the House is based on the population of a state. The more population your state has, the more reps you have in the House of Reps. And the Senate, everybody has two votes regardless of the size of your state. So the big states have more influence in the House, and the smaller states can have their influence in the Senate. Also, we talked about the fact that under the Articles of Confederation system, 9 out of 13 states had to pass a law. That number has been dropped a bit to now just 51%. And we talked about how the process goes between like a bill being passed in both the House and the Senate. You need 51% in both. And even that in modern times is hard to do, but it's easier than 9 out of 13. And then don't forget, under our new government, under the Constitution, this government's going to have the ability to both tax and declare war, something that the Articles of Confederation Congress like lacked. All right. Other key things kind of continued. Remember, under the Articles of Confederation, 13 out of 13 states had to agree for an amendment to go into effect. That process is different under the Constitution. So it's not easy, but it's easier than unanimous support. So it's a two-part process. Two-thirds of both houses of Congress have to agree to propose an amendment. And then once both houses of Congress, both the House and the Senate, agree to propose an amendment, it's the job of the states to ratify or approve that amendment. And you need three quarters. So it's two-thirds of Congress and three-quarters of the states in order to add an amendment to the Constitution. Again, it's not easy, but it's easier than what it was like under the article system. And then these are just some of the amendments we talked about during the first semester. We talked about the 10th Amendment, right? It's basically basically all powers not specifically given to the national government in the Constitution were supposed to belong to the states. We obviously talked about how the use of the Necessary and Proper Clause kind of changed this a bit. We talked about the 12th Amendment, which basically changes the presidential election process. It used to be first place president, second place vice president. Now we basically have a president and a vice president from one party running against a president and a vice president from another party. 12th Amendment changes to that system. We talked about the 16th Amendment, which gives the national government the ability to collect taxes directly from the citizens. We talked about the 17th Amendment, which allows senators to be directly elected by the people. Up until this point, the senators were appointed by the state legislatures. The 17th Amendment changes that so that the citizens are electing them just like they always have for the reps. The 20th Amendment basically changes the start times for both Congress and the president. Election day has always been in November, but they used to not take over until March. This changes the start time for new Congress people and the president from March to now. They start in January. There's less of that awkward transition period. We talked about the 22nd Amendment. This limits presidents to 2 full terms or a maximum of 10 years in office. And then we talked about the 25th Amendment, which deals with like replacing the vice president. There's a vacancy, replacing the president if there's a vacancy. So it just deals with replacing the president and vice president. And I should have mentioned, we also talked about the 14th Amendment just a little bit when we looked at the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment when we dealt with the gerrymandering cases. The 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause deals with all sort of like types of discrimination and people that feel like they're being discriminated against. They basically allege that their 14th Amendment right to equal protection under the laws is being violated. So, again, these are some of the important things you want to remember about the Constitution that we talked about in the first semester.